Taqwa is the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching us. And taqwa is also the concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only watches us, but that we feel that we are in the presence of Allah. And if we are mindful of our duties to Allah, okay, then inshallah the consequence of this is that we will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of us. Okay, what this means is that we will feel that we are always in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will instill within our heart the concept of taqwa. We will feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding us. He is there to support us. He is there to help us. We feel that we are getting the protection from Allah, and victory and success is also from Allah. So this is what will come from being mindful to Allah. The hadith goes on to talk about seeking help from Allah. If we need help, then we seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We only have to ask Him, and Allah will respond to our supplications. We have to put our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we put our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find that everything that is around us, we become content with. So if we are mindful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we learn that everything that is around us, whatever state that Allah has kept us in, we learn to be content within that state. And instead of looking to other people who have more than us, instead we look at those people who have less than us, and we learn to be content and very pleased with the provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. When we put our trust in Allah, we also learn to be tolerant of the difficult times that we face. So sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts difficulties upon us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us in times when He tries us and tests us. Through this, we learn to be tolerant. So if we are mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then whatever situation that we are in, we learn to be content with it, and we learn to have sabr or tolerance. So inshallah, to conclude, this hadith tells us that that peace and happiness comes from being mindful of Allah. When we are mindful of Allah, we get the protection of Allah. We learn to be conscious of Allah. We learn to have patience and contentment in all situations, whether they be in times of prosperity or in times of adversity. And this hadith also goes on to tell us about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always in control. So whatever happens to us, it happens with the control and the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this control that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in all affairs and all matters that happen to us and around us is a firm conviction that we ask of Allah what we need of Him, knowing that He is in control of all affairs. We are content with all matters because we know that all matters are decreed and all matters are within the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We learn to be tolerant and have patience in all matters because there is not a situation that will befall us except that it is within the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we think about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of all things, we remember that we must fulfill our obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And fulfilling our obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make us that much closer to Allah, and we'll get that much more support from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With all of these things that we do, we remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us so that He can reward us for fulfilling our obligations to Him and for being mindful of our duties to Him. He only wants to reward us. We only have to be mindful of our duties to Him in order for Him to reward us, inshallah. With that, I'll open the floor for any questions. For those people who are participating via the webcast, we need to just open up the email account at reverts@wislam.org. We'll do that in just a couple of minutes. So if anybody has submitted any questions online, we'll attend to those questions during the course of the sessions, inshallah. If there are any questions from the audience here.